Welcome to Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I am your host, Joy Votrobek, and I have with me our senior fellow, Alan Dowd, today. Welcome back, Alan.
Good to be here as always, Joy.
Thank you, and we are going to talk to Alan about his latest article, How Xi Refashions China. And we're talking a little about President Xi's nationalism and how similar in ideology it is to Germany after World War II. So,
right,
Alan, with that being said, I thought that was a very interesting how you had put that in your article.
Well, thank you. I'm not the only one. There's other people who are writing a bit about it or noticing it. And of course, this isn't to suggest that it's a perfect parallel to what could be called the national extreme nationalism that took over Germany after World War I and before World War II. But there are some similarities, and they're frightening similarities. But as I said in that piece you just posted, I think last week, really, and we can get into some of those similarities if you want, but really it's just exchanging one kind of anti-human, anti-liberty, anti-civilized totalitarianism for another.
Yes, and we actually have discussions about China here a lot about they're really not the old communist, I guess, view you could say, and you had in your paper how Mao had embraced the Marxist-Leninist ideology.
Right. He was, Mao, who was, responsible for tens of millions of murders. So I'm not, make it clear here to our listeners, I'm not saying, gee, I wish Xi would be more like Mao.
No,
I'm just saying his kind of totalitarianism was different.
Yes.
It was also not expansionist. Xi's looks to be expansionist. Xi's looks to be more embracing what others have called Han supremacy, a certain kind of ethnic supremacy, whereas Mao was a true believer in Marxist-Leninist principles, which Marxism believes in this, brotherhood of humanity's workers, that their nationality is downplayed to the brotherhood of the proletariat, and Mao was a true believer in that. All of the things that he did were indicative of that. But again, he was a brutal, terrible totalitarian.
Yes.
Xi seems to be shifting toward, as I said in that essay that you posted, this kind of adopting some elements of extreme nationalism, including things related to a pure Han blood. He talks about the dream of China reunification and rejuvenation. He talks about he raises victimhood a lot. These are things that really do echo some of the things that happened in the interwar years in Germany.
Mm-hmm. And what also caught me was what you had said, or what struck me was when you were pointing out Mao and back in that time period, you mentioned the proletariat or the working class rising up their revolutionary struggle, but also losing that or erasing traces of the individual to where it's a collective society. And so my question for you would be, how far has President Xi's nationalism moved from Mao's Marxist-Lenin form of communism?
I'd say in some ways, dramatically far from Maoism. And I think maybe even more worrying is how far Xi has shifted China in his reign, between his reign, say to compare his reign and the years post-Mao, when China really did, and it was led by a series of leaders who really did literally dragged China into the international community, tried to modernize and, in a sense, even humanize the Chinese PRC system. There were limits on terms. There are limits on the powers of the premier. All those have been totally stripped away in Xi's rule since 2012, 2013. He has no they've taken away term limits. He is known as the core leader, a name that was not used, in the post-Mao years. And then he talks quite a bit about reunifying Chinese lands. Taiwan is obviously one. We could argue that, and I think fairly, that Hong Kong was a step in his dream of consolidating Chinese lands. There's ethnic Han peoples in neighboring countries of China. It's not just Taiwan and Hong Kong that he has eyes on. So this is, and that's where, when it gets into an expansionism, and of course, you and I and American Security Council and all Reaganites, and that's what we are, recognize and believe in the importance of freedom, individual liberty around the world, human rights around the world, full stop. And I'm not going to say however, full stop. The thing about an expansionist state, though, it gets much more worrisome than just a state that mistreats its people internally. Though Xi is certainly doing that. When they train their sights externally, it becomes really deeply a concern about global order and stability, and then truly U.S. interests.
Yes, I'm going to get to that too. I have some questions on that as well. But going to the Han supremacy that you were discussing there, if Xi is favoring this Han supremacy, does that indicate at all he's moving towards some sort of recognition of the individual, or is he expecting ethnic Hans to be part of the whole common blood, as you had mentioned, with more of a favoritism?
It's in a way, it may be kind of a gross and sick hybrid, of the worst of collectivist communism and the worst of irredentist nationalism. So common blood, no individual. The state and the ruler representing the people, the Han people, is above all else. So it may be a mix of the worst. And there's been some great researching and reporting done by The Economist in some long essays about how Han ethnicity groups are treated more favorably inside the PRC by Xi's China, and other groups are mistreated. Han groups, Han may have better track toward advancement in careers, advancement in education, et cetera, things like that. So that gets into kind of a racialism that is very different than what was the People's Republic of China. Even The Economist notes that there's always been an effort or this edge inside China about a Han purity, but it was always kind of beaten back and suppressed by the old Chinese communist system, and that's being kind of turned away or shifted to this new kind of racialism, it seems.
So we know that they monitor their people internally and also abroad. So
right.
Are they, I guess from your opinion, is she looking to bring that Han blood back to China, or at least keep them know where they are?
Well, yeah, we've seen reports recently of the Chinese, a couple of unsettling things. Chinese and entities in Canada, which is a proud liberal democracy, and of course a neighbor and an ally. Chinese government entities targeting Chinese nationals, and we've also seen multiple reports of Chinese entities setting up, for lack of a better word, police units that are disguised as other things in foreign countries to, like you say, track and apprehend, and then send back to China Chinese nationals who don't follow follow the party line. Those things are deeply worrying. That's this extraterritoriality, as a political scientist would say, is something that China has no right to in those cases. There's and these things they're doing clandestinely because they know that it would be, for pushed back and unaccepted if they were done in the open. The things like the Confucius Institutes, which are in one way out in the open, in another way quite clandestine, because even though they're funded by the Chinese government, usually at universities, academic institutions around the democratic world, what the Chinese aren't saying, what the Chinese government isn't saying, is that these places are really places that are conducting surveillance, or places that are really agents of the Chinese regime. They're not academic institutions.
So you're taking the words out of my mouth, because I was going to say really propagating their government is great, and not
right, and promoting. That's right, promoting this notion of Chinese greatness. The China Dream is the phrase that Xi uses, talking to the Chinese people and threatening the Taiwanese people. But it's this is it's something we've talked about it for years. You and I and the American Security Council. It's something that China is a multifaceted threat. It meets probably more of the boxes of a superpower even than the Soviet Union does. One thing, interestingly, though, I'd say, Joy, about this Han supremacy and this Xi, I don't know if you want to call it Xiism or this kind of weird hybrid totalitarianism he's uncorked, is it may be, and the jury's still out because it's early, it may be less internationally appealing than the Soviet communism of the 1950s and 60s was to the post-colonial world, but we'll see. I mean, China has a big checkbook, and
yes,
countries may not sign on ideologically the way they did to the Soviet Union, but it's easy to accept China's cash, and then there's a lot of strings attached to that cash, as we're seeing with
persuasive that way for sure.
Right. So they have different tools to play or to use than the Soviets did, I would say, in Cold War One, what I call Cold War One. We're in Cold War 2.0 now. So.
And maybe you're right. I mean, if people put together what he's doing with this nationalism and link it to the post-World War I, and how Germany's nationalism led to the whole Nazi.
Yeah, that's where it becomes very, very worrisome. It's not just that China is brutalizing minorities and basically anybody who falls out of line with the state. That's what China has been doing since 1949, the PRC and the CCP. But if they're going to swing their sights on the ethnic Han in other countries, 25% of Malaysia is a Han population. There are the Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and Tajik governments are concerned because there are Han minorities there. Then you can start to get to, he starts to make the case that I have to intervene in these places to protect the Han race, and that's what Hitler justified, how he justified his terrible war of aggression. And Xi's already said he's going to, one way or another, unify Taiwan with the mainland. And of course, that would be the cascading effects of that. As I said before, any unification between Taiwan and China that is not agreed to by a democratic vote of the Taiwanese people, it would be a tragedy and a cascading catastrophe for our allies in that region, and I think for the United States.
Yes, we were discussing that offline, as how quickly that could happen and become a reality.
It could, for sure. And so I do think he is in a sense shifting or pushing China in a new direction that is more nationalist than traditional communist. Obviously, they have, unlike the Soviet Union, because the Chinese did embrace elements of capitalism. It's not a capitalist country. It's not a free market in any way, but they've introduced elements of it, and they've been able to steer and control the free market forces in a way that that has strengthened the regime rather than weakened it. And that was the thing that what I call the trade uber alles crowd, who are thoughtful people. They're people and their motives were good. They're people on both sides of the American political aisle and both sides of the Atlantic. They thought that if we could bring China into the international market system and China could embrace free market, free enterprise principles, that would lead to political reform. That just didn't happen. China has found, the regime, the CCP has found a way to control and use this booming economic and flourishing economy, which is partly based on some embrace of capitalist principles. And it's been able to do that while controlling and even, I think, strengthening its political stance.
And that, I thought that was great that you came out with this, Xi's refashions China and the nationalism aspect, because we talk here regularly about how we don't really feel China is a communist nation. It's more, like you said, they've incorporated this capitalism, free market somewhat.
Yeah. Yes,
to be able to get on the world stage.
You can't call it a communist. It certainly is, no. And it's also deeply, and another card that it can play that the Soviets couldn't is that it's deeply entwined with America's and Europe's economies and Japan's. And, the Soviet Union literally built walls around its figurative and literal walls.
Yes.
That is something that made it more difficult, made it easier for the West and the United States in specific to keep it at bay and to punish it at times. It's going to be harder to do that with China, because you're going to end up punishing yourself, which we've seen, by the way. The Trump tariffs and the Biden tariffs, which are just the extension of of President Trump's economic approach to China. Some of those, I would submit, have hurt America's economy, and that's again two men from different parties who and I think most of the economic, some even call it open economic warfare against China. It's largely supported by the American people, I think, but it is affecting parts of our economy, and that's just small amounts of pullback from the U.S. PRC economic linkage. If it were to, imagine, Joy, if they attacked Taiwan, and we tried to do, and I mean we and the European Union, the British, the Japanese, and South Koreans and Australians tried to do in China what we did in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, it would have a devastating effect because of China's tendrils in our economic system, which just didn't exist with Russia's, let alone the Soviet Union, decades ago.
Yes, we were much more reliant on China than we were Russia at all.
Right, and we saw that with the pandemic too, with things related to literally keeping people alive. Whether it be pharmaceuticals or even the kind of equipment that people needed, we realized that we were far too connected.
Yes, exactly.
Right, the American Security Council, we've been talking about that for years, but finally other people realized it.
Are talking. And they just, the other day, I was reading the article on China now going to South Africa for their corn and not the U.S.
And that was another thing that, we saw it. I think both the Trump and Biden administrations thought that was a card to play. But China has maybe found a way about that, using agriculture, found a way around that too. But it's going to be a challenge. I think it's a challenge that the American people and our allies, I'm certain, can rise to. It's just a matter of will. And there'll be, in this Cold War II, just like Cold War I, there'll be moments of high tension and near hot war. The goal, I think, will be to go up to that edge without shifting into hot war, but standing firm on our principles. And the key, as American Security Council has been saying for decades, is peace through strength. You have to have the military capability to back up your words, to back up your principles. And paradoxically, you have to be willing to go to war so that you don't go to war.
Yes, very well put, because I was going to say Peace Through Strength is the name of the podcast now, because we're trying to really focus on Peace Through Strength solutions to the issue here. And I don't know about you, but I feel like we need to let the world know, even it's on the small stage right here, that the CCP are not victims, but they're victimizing ethnic groups within their own country there, including Christians and Muslims and the Tibetans, to name a few.
That's right. Well, we're a little megaphone, like you just said, Joy. But if all the folks that listen can share that message, share it with or encourage their members of Congress, the big megaphone, the bully pulpit, as President Theodore Roosevelt talked about, I don't think President Biden's done a good job at all. I don't think many presidents for several years have done much to draw attention to the things you're talking about inside China. The information is important, and sharing information, draw attention to the things that the Xi regime does to its own people. And whether it be Laogai prisons, which they say don't exist anymore because they changed the name. Well, okay, whatever you want to call them, the work prisons that you send people to because they disagree with you politically, or they're Christians, or they're Muslims, exist. Tens of thousands of people are there. What they've done to the Uyghur Muslims is a genocide, not according to me or you or the CIA, but according to international UN agencies. And it's a brutal regime, and it's one that its model. We need to use information and the battle of ideas to tell those on the fence in the world that that this is not a model you want to adopt.
Right.
It's not the wave of the future, and but that's a big part of this struggle. And President Reagan was great at drawing attention to the Soviet Union's brutal human rights record. I think we need to do that. We need to return to that modal. President Biden has
China. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. President Biden has 2 years to do that, and you just made a great distinction, Joy. It is the CCP. It's not the Chinese people.
Right.
It's the regime. Just as it was in the Cold War, it was the Soviet system, the Soviet regime, not the Russian people, not the Polish, East German, Czech, or Hungarian people. It was that regime, those regimes.
I'm sure many of those people did not agree with the regime. Just probably the same in China as well.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. And but that's part of a Cold War struggle is the information campaign, the information front. We shut down the U.S. Information Agency in 1999. That's a bipartisan decision. I don't blame any one president for that or one party, but it needs to be reopened. I heard one official during the Trump administration that said we need to have a USIA on steroids to fight these tyrannies, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and to meet them on the information front. Because as you alluded to, Joy, they're conducting information campaigns against us.
Yes.
And we need to challenge that and then roll it back and really try to get the message into China too, by the way, to break through what's called the Great Firewall. And we can do that technologically. We spent a very little amount of money and it had big impact to create things like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the USIA, and other agencies to get information and to get systems into the hands of dissidents so that they could hear the truth coming from the West. And we need to do similar things with China.
That's a great point, Alan, for our Peace Through Strength strategy, is to get that and to let them know we know what's going on. We don't agree with it. And
that's right. And
go ahead.
No, good. I interrupted you. Step in. Go ahead.
No. You were saying about the Confucius Institutes earlier, and yes, so they get caught in America, Canada, wherever, and then now they just kind of change their name and go under some sort of university program, and then use social media platforms to propagate as well.
That's right, and we can do a lot of things. And there are some good things that happened. Secretary of State Pompeo was very effective at raising the Confucius Institute, raising our awareness of the Confucius Institutes, and a lot of them are being shut down in the United States and in Europe, which is good. It's not that we're against free exchange. We're against using a front organization to be an agent of the Chinese Communist Party. That's there's a new special committee of Congress that is it's cleverly called and smartly, shrewdly, just as you alluded to. It's not a committee about the activities of China. It's the committee about the activities of the Chinese Communist Party and things like the Confucius Institutes and other things. The other thing we could do, by the way, and there's a lot of cards that we're just not playing, we could say to the Chinese in high-level forums or in the ministerial level forums, you want a Confucius Institute here, we'll have as many Confucius Institutes in the United States as you allow us to have Hamilton or Washington Institutes in China.
Absolutely, yes. We're a big believer of that reciprocity.
Right. And if they balk at that, then we shut down all of the Confucius Institutes. If they're open to that, I believe we can win the battle of ideas. I know we can because our ideas are the future.
As you said, we need the will, though, too. And I think
that's right.
We can condemn them for the Uyghur Muslim situation and the Falun Gong, if I'm saying that correctly.
Sure.
And the atrocities that they're committing with the Christians as well, and anybody that just goes against their party line. But if we're not going to do anything action-wise and we continue to do business as normal,
that's right.
We're not making much of an impact.
That's right. And so that's another great point, Joy. I mean, it can't just be words. It can't just be information. There's got to be action behind it. And going back to what I said, we can take those actions to try to decouple some elements of our economy. And we definitely need to have resilience in essential equipment, supply chains and things like that, diversify rare earths and all these other crucial elements to our technology, things that are essential to public health. But if we're going to do that, we need to prepare. Policymakers need to prepare the American public for the shock that comes with that. It's a shock to the price tag. Instead of your TV costing, a 60-inch TV costing an unbelievable $500 or $600, it might cost $800 or $900. Instead of your phone costing, $300, it might cost $500, and on we go. Your laptop, all those things. Those are shocks that we'll have to withstand. But the policymakers have to, and that goes right up to the president, have to brace the American people for that. And I think then get into an education campaign to help America understand there's going to be sacrifices we make to wage and peacefully win Cold War II, just as we did during Cold War I.
And convince, I think, the businessmen and probably the big businesses really that you're alluding to with the TVs and laptops and stuff. They're there because they're making better bottom line numbers right now. It's cheaper.
That's right. You said it, and it's very simple, and it makes sense. Americans are smart consumers. People dismiss Americans as not very thoughtful, but they're smart consumers. They know where to get quality things for the cheaper amount. The diversification and the offshoring of our manufacturing came with a cost, to be sure. There's a loss of certain kinds of jobs and such, but the benefits outweighed the cost. The reason I can say that is the American people voted with their pocketbooks, right? I mean, and with their wallets, and they like having cheaper washers, dryers. Let's just talk about things that didn't exist in the technology or the digital age. Washers, dryers, office desks, all this stuff is cheaper because it's made by cheaper labor.
Oh, yes. I know. I like to go buy a smart TV for a lot cheaper.
That's right. And we can go you just go look around your office or look around your house. I wrote a column years ago before Christmas saying, go look around your house and look at where everything is made. Turn it over and look at where it is made, and I'll bet you that 70-80% of it is made in China. But if we're going to shift and decouple, we got to prepare the American people for the costs, and there's going to be real costs to that. And some of our neighbors may not be able to handle those costs.
We're already facing the inflation and the housing, and so it would be a lot, but.
That's right. But this is an enemy, and you said it greatly, and I'm glad you did, and you said it well. The regime is the enemy. We need to fight the information battle. We need to meet them at that front. We need to challenge them technologically. We definitely need to. I believe, as you've heard me say, we need to have a larger share of our defense budget devoted to of our GDP devoted to defense, and we'd better have our eyes opened about this strange and ugly shift into a kind of hyper-racialism or nationalism that Xi seems to be embracing.
Yes, definitely. And I really like your point about getting the Chinese people themselves informed of the West. We support you. We know what's going on. We don't agree with the atrocities there. So.
Right. And they may not even know about these things. You know, it's many of these things. China's government is, you could definitely use the term Orwellian. I think it's beyond what Orwell even could have dreamed about or had nightmares about, what China's able to do with its technology and its social credit system, and then siphoning off or preventing the exchange of information. It's very possible that Chinese people don't know the things that are happening at the hands of the CCP inside China.
Yes, I had read a book, and I wrote a paper too about how the CCP or the whatever regime is in there wants to have a unified front to look good no matter what to their people, right, and into the world. Now, like this peace brokering they're trying to do with the Ukraine and Russia, I just kind of laugh, but.
Right, that's gonna, if Xi succeeds, that will elevate his standing, and he'll play that to great effect to the Chinese people and internal audience. The bigger concern I have is if things, if China's economy it isn't growing as fast as it needs to keep certain interests happy inside China, that he would, like dictators have for centuries, that he would divert attention away from internal problems by doing something externally, like attacking Taiwan.
Yes.
That's something that dictators have done for centuries, literally. When there's a problem at home, you do something externally, usually a military aggression, to have people rally around the regime.
And when they do have internal problems there, that's not being discussed. And in fact, our senior analyst is going to have a paper coming out about that shortly. So.
That's good. Well, I have another part of this, part two of this series. We'll talk a little bit more about what Xi's doing externally and how this really could concern us when it comes to our interests, not just our ideals.
Yes. Well, I wanted to bring up the peace brokering because obviously, like you said, that's going to make them look good on the world stage, and then obviously trying to upstage America. So them using the yuan as, hey, this could be an alternative to the American dollar.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother, beyond just a podcast discussion.
Yes,
what China trying to divest or break up the dollar's power around the world. They're definitely doing that. And Russia is trying to help them with that.
Well, that's not surprising. But
not at all. That's right. And the peace, I think if you just look at, and that's a whole other issue, Joy, but it's literally another part of the world, but it underscores that crises in Ukraine are connected to Asia, and crises in Taiwan are connected to Europe. Just like in Cold War I, what happened in Korea was connected to what was happening in West Berlin and vice versa. But in the case of this, if there's any kind of peace gambit, if you just look at what Putin says, he still wants Zelensky's regime gone, and he wants Ukraine to be subordinate to Russia. And you look at what Zelensky says. Zelensky says we want all of our territory liberated. I don't know how you can find there's no common ground there. They're so far apart that there's no way to broker a peace between those two things. And I just think we need to support, and I know you do too, support Ukraine until it defines and whatever it defines as victory, that's what we should support Ukraine at. If they say it's everything, that's what we should support. If they say it's everything but Crimea, then we should support. But it should be what they say. And right now, they're not anywhere close to this. What Putin's demands are.
Right.
And you can't blame them because it's a war of aggression and it's a war of war crimes.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I kind of have to laugh about President Xi trying to peace broker in there. It's not a funny matter, but I just, like you said,
No,
we're not coming anywhere close to peace right at this moment.
That's right. And I know what you're saying. It's laughable. If cities weren't on fire, it would be laughable. But I do think you're right that his goal is not some altruistic. He doesn't want to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It's to elevate himself internationally and at home.
Yep. Well, Alan, thank you very much, and I look forward to your next article coming out. So.
Good. Always enjoyed chatting with you. Great and stimulating discussion as always, Joy.
Yes, I thought this was an excellent on the whole nationalism issue and the way you had pointed that out, because we've been talking here a lot about China and, like I said, not being a communist country and really more of probably a fascist, surveillance state sure.
That's the word. I mean, and I do talk about that in the part 2 of this series that I know you haven't posted yet, but that may be the word that they're moving closer to, is a kind of fascism, especially given how they control industry, the way they control industry and use industry, and then the way they're using racialism, and then to kind of steer what the people can do and to empower the regime.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely look forward to your next paper, Alan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, you can read Alan's paper at our website, www.ascf.us. And his upcoming article will be out next month. Follow us on our newsletter, and you'll get all the updates on our podcasts and articles as they come out. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and Rumble channel by typing in the American Security Council Foundation. We appreciate all your comments. And please join us again next time as we bring you more Peace Through Strength podcasts.